So Teun is a malaria scientist and also analyzed his footprint heavily during COVID, and we had many discussions. And I think he also realized that science is great, but yes, we have a responsibility to also show that we can make changes. So Teun, with that, I will happy to learn from your insights. Thanks.
Thank you, Jeroen. Thanks for organizing this. So I'm Teun Bousema. I'm a malaria researcher, and in addition to astronomers feeling or seeing the fact that we have no planet B, I think in health sciences and in global health, it's very evident that there are implications for of climate change for human health. At the same time, here you see a picture of me in Cameroon. I used to be a gold member. I confess, I used to be a very frequent flyer, and I think flying is really ingrained in the academic processes and very much also in my daily life. So I'm really inspired by the first two talks so far. When I talked to a few people who are addressing sustainability in academia, they said it's good to talk about electricity. It's good to talk about plastic waste, but don't talk about aviation. Don't go there. It will make you super unpopular. And it is something that we just see as a privilege, that we are world citizens and we can travel a lot. I think this has been addressed very nicely by Suzanne. I think it is obvious that we as academics are hypermobile. And an analysis of the Young Academy of Sciences in the Netherlands did a calculation of how much does air travel make up of the carbon footprint of different universities. And you see that here in the top panel, and the first bar is the Rotterdam, Erasmus University in Rotterdam, where they estimated that 27% of all the entire carbon footprint of that university was due to air travel staff. Also, I am involved in a lot of clinical work, also clinical trials. And in the pie chart, you see quite a detailed analysis of a very large 5-year multi-center clinical trial funded by the Medical Research Council in the UK, where they estimated of the total carbon emissions associated with that single clinical trial, how much is actually due to travel. And actually, analyzing that, they found that 45% of all the carbon emissions of this very large trial were due to either travel of staff or the transport of materials. I see a raised hand. Is that because you can hear me, Jeroen? You can hear me okay?
Everything's fine, yeah. Everything's
okay.
Fine.
Perfect. And then, so it's clear that there's a lot of travel in academia, and it's often I often hear the remark that academia is such a small part of society, then clearly it doesn't matter. It's not really relevant to reduce our own flying. But at the same time, there are an estimated 7.8 million researchers worldwide. So we are actually a small-sized country, and a small-sized country among whom many travel a lot. So I don't think this argument of academia being small really counts. So what I'm going to talk about in the next 10 minutes is 2 examples: the carbon footprint of academic conferences, and also I'm going to talk about a role for academic funders in stimulating thoughtful travel. And then I will talk a little bit about what we can do, talk about carbon offsetting as a possible solution, and then I want to tell you about a thoughtful travel pledge that we're preparing with some international colleagues. So first, calculating the carbon footprint of a conference. So I started this before COVID. So as of 2011, I started skipping my conference, the American Society of Tropical Medicine Conference. I skipped one every 3 conferences because of discomfort with my own travel. And at some point, well before the COVID crisis, I said, can I calculate your carbon footprint? Because I would like to have a virtual option. And they said, well, that's very nice, but it's just technically impossible to organize virtual conferences. And this is towards the end of 2019, so it's not that long ago. So I received all the data from their participants. I assumed economy class only. And then I spent evenings during lockdown looking at the nearest airport of participants and estimating their most likely travel route. And then with some help of astronomers, calculate the carbon dioxide equivalent emissions, both the direct emissions, but also the indirect emissions. And that's, for some reason, that's something that some airline companies like KLM, they don't include in their estimates, but actually it's of course not only CO2, but it's also the indirect emissions. When I did that, and this is for medical conferences, this is actually a relatively small conference. So for 4,800 participants, together they flew 44.6 million kilometers for a 4-day conference, and they emitted an estimated 8,600 metric tons of CO2. And here you see the intercontinental participants, so the people not from the US, they made up about 40%, slightly less of the participants, but at the same time, they made 85% of all the kilometers and 85% of all the CO2 emitted. So just echoing what Suzanne and Leo already indicated, it's a long distance travel that is important. And this map, actually, I like maps in general, but I think also this map really conveys the message that we really travel long distances for something that can be organized in a different way. So with some colleagues, I published it in a Dutch newspaper, and then actually I was approached by a few other conference organizers and they said, can you make the same map for us? And then you realize that sometimes there's also something wrong with the conference location. So this is the World Lung Conference. They chose a very nice place in India, but everyone had to fly very far. So even compared to the previous conference, they had an increase of 55% just because they chose, as I see it, the wrong location. So with 7.8 million researchers, that means that if you assume that it's 1 ton per, very conservatively, 1 ton of CO2 per conference, and on average, every researcher attends 1 conference, it means that carbon or academic conferencing actually has a larger carbon footprint than a country like Uganda or a country like Iceland. So it's really not trivial. So what is the future of academic conferences? I also had a slide on virtual conferences, but Leo did that very well, so I've removed that. But there's virtual conferences. I think there's also a lot to be gained by just doing a biannual in-person meeting, because I think it may be too fast for some people to really give up in-person meetings, but biannual, of course, slashes it by 50%. And another option here could be a decentralized conference. So I calculated the carbon footprint of the same conference, but then assuming that every continent would have their own conference venue, and that would already reduce the carbon footprint by 68%. With, of course, the remark that you have to make sure that the conference in Nairobi is of the same quality as the conference in Washington. Probably the music is better in Nairobi, but also the scientific quality has to be as good at all the different sites. So now one other example, because I think conferences, we like to talk about conferences, but I think there is even more low-hanging fruit. So funders of academic research, they often have panel meetings. And for instance, the European Research Council, they have 2 rounds of panel meetings where panel members meet and discuss proposals. And during one of these meetings, they fly in candidates for a pitch. And I've been through that process a few times myself. You just give a 10-minute pitch, 20 minutes interview, and that involves a lot of travel. So I calculated for 2 different funders, European Research Council starting grant, and also the European funder of clinical trials in developing country. I calculated their carbon footprint in 2019, and this is just for awarding the funds. And just for awarding the funds, they made 6.4 million kilometers. And in 2020, they did it all online. And some people said it was actually more efficient. But at the same time, the organizers of those panel meetings, they say, we would love to go back to normal because it's just better for the team spirit. And it's nicer to see each other in person. But this is a huge footprint. So I would argue that this is deciding to go back to normal is actually an active decision to just ignore all the climate evidence. So one other thing we did, and this is my last example, is we also calculated for 47 grants, large grants, how much money was actually spent on travel. So 515 million euro worth of research funding in Leiden and in Nijmegen. And then on average, if you exclude salaries, 13% of all the direct costs is spent on travel. So it means there are funders that allow us to make all these journeys. So I think funders also have a role in saying, we're not going to fund all your travel. Make a strong case why you would have to attend in person and not do things by Zoom, for instance. So we are working with funders to really ask them to at least include a sustainability paragraph in their funding proposals. So 2 slides or 1 slide on offsetting. So I started offsetting my flights, and of course that feels great, but it's actually a modern day indulgence. Of course, it makes you feel that you can just pay for your carbon footprint and you don't have to worry about it. That money of offsetting, it's often like 2% of the ticket price, it really goes to good purposes. So for instance, in Australia, often to land conservation or fire abatement, or in Africa to efficient cook stoves, and they're all good, but they don't really remove greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. And then if you think about how much you actually pay, you often pay $3 to $15 per ton of CO2, and that is supposed to solve it all. And this is a very elegant piece of equipment we have in my lab to check whether things are credible. But of course, this doesn't make sense. This can't be the solution. So you can discuss whether offsetting is part of a thoughtful travel plan, or you could also argue that it's actually a dangerous smokescreen. It prevents people from flying less because they feel they can easily offset their emissions. So one of the things we're planning, and I was actually hoping to do the launch today, but I need a few more days. We are preparing a thoughtful travel pledge with a seriously funny animation that is ready. I'll launch it before the end of the week, and I'll make sure that Jeroen makes sure that you have the access to it. And then linked to this animation, there's also a pledge online where we say, I, as an individual, I pledge to travel less, but also I ask institutes and funders to do, and then we have a few action points. So I'll share the details. We'll do a soft launch by the end of this week, and then a serious launch 23rd of August across the world, and help is welcome. So please send me an email if you want to be part of this. I think it will be good. And the thoughtful travel pledge includes individual decisions, reduce, think carefully about what travel is truly essential, especially for senior academics who fly a lot, and they may have to give the opportunity to junior people. Replace, choose virtual over in-person meetings where you can. Leo talked about that. And refine. And I think if you are still flying, make sure your remaining trips are as valuable and as efficient as possible. Then also, you want to be a credible advocate for systemic change. So ask funders to have a low carbon travel policy themselves, and also ask this of their grantees. Institute directors to really support high quality virtual interactions and make sure that their employees get every opportunity to reduce their carbon footprint. And conference organizers and institutes continue organizing virtual meetings. It was a steep learning curve, but we're not there yet. And rethink networking events. And the reason why we think this systemic change is really needed, that I think the bottom-up initiatives are really inspiring, but of course there is just no time to only rely on bottom-up initiatives. So with this, some acknowledgements, and also DJ Barret, another astronomer, he pointed me towards this online travel calculator that could have saved a lot of time, because I did a lot of things the careful but also slightly stupid way. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm very happy to take questions. Super,
thanks, Teun. So please add more questions in the Q&A. There is one from Tina Jacobs, who's actually from the Belgium or Flemish funding body, who's going to talk later. She asked, what exactly do you want to include in grant proposals? So really just a paragraph, or really clear guidelines, or what would you like to have in a class or in a science proposal?
So I think that's an excellent question. And I have started discussions with ERC and also with NWO in the Netherlands. I think just a paragraph sounds like nothing, but I think linking or thinking about the analogy related to equality and diversity and just gender issues, already having a paragraph like that and saying, I've thought about this, I'm going to be careful about my electricity use, I'm going to not have a project progress meeting every year, but perhaps only at the start of a meeting and halfway through, that already helps. So I think that a paragraph like that, where you really justify your travel, is a very good starting point. And at the same time, I think funders could say, we think that virtual meetings are the default, and you have to explain to us why you deviate from this default. And I think thinking like that, and I think funders have a role in that, would be very powerful.
Good. So there's many people that want to support the pledge. So we'll definitely try to communicate everything and get the context together. But one question, is this linked to the Scientists for the Future pledge too? Or because there's also Scientists for the Future pledge on I think flight and travel.
So I will make sure I reach out to those people. At the moment, it's linked to an initiative called Time to Explain and flyingless.org in the US. But I think there are several pledges that I guess should be linked. One of the things we really hope to do is to also make a searchable Excel sheet so you can find out where your allies live in your country or perhaps in your institute.
Great. Your maps and graphs look great, Teun. So these are all made by yourself, I guess, or they're not like one of these tools where you can automatically, I mean, this was the hope for today, that we would also do some kind of calculation of the people participating and then compare it virtual versus live. But this is, I guess, still quite a lot of work to do.
It's still laborious, but it's actually a great idea, Jeroen, and I'll discuss that with the person who helps me make these maps, whether he now has made 5 of these maps with me. So perhaps at some point things can be automated.
Good. Is there, so one question from Philip from Agas in Austria is, thanks, so great talk, thank you. Do you know of any funding calls which already ask for a sustainable concept from the applicants?
Yes, there is the Wellcome Trust in a way as an example. So they say from our laureates, we ask this. And looking into it, also Marie Curie has adopted this. It's still a bit soft in the sense that it's the good advice, but they don't enforce it. But I think there are good examples. So I think one of the things that I would love to organize is a virtual meeting with different funders with some good examples and some people who may follow to talk about what funders can actually do.